Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Changing the Museum Through Service Design. My name is Ariana French. I'm Director of Technology at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. And we're going to basically walk you through some concepts and ideas that are at the heart of what's called service design to give you a sense of what it's all about. We'll follow that up with some real-world case studies so you can see service design concepts and tools in action. And finally, we'll talk about some tools and examples that you can use right away and bring back to your institutions and put to work. We're going to start with Kimberley Crofts and followed by myself, Ariana French, and then finally our third and final presenter will be Dana Mitroff Silvers. And without further ado, I will pass it over to Kimberley.
Hi, I'm going to sit down, sorry. You can all vaguely see us. If you can't, you can come a little closer. So the arrows are working. Yeah. I work in Sydney, Australia at a company called Meld Studios, and we're a small consultancy. We also have offices in Melbourne, and we design predominantly for large organisations, both government and corporate, and also starting to do a lot more cultural work. And we use the tool set of design to help these organisations redesign the services that they provide to their audiences. And are the arrows working now? Which one were you using?
The actual.
Oh, the actual. That one. Okay. So over the next 50 minutes or so, we're going to be talking through these basic principles. I won't read them now because we're going to read them out as we go through the case studies. And these are some of the methods that we use at Meld Studios to help these companies redesign their services. One of the I just wonder actually, how many people in the audience know about service design or are using service design in their practice? Okay, great. Well, firstly, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what design is or what that means to me, just so that you know what we think about when we talk about design. And this quote from Herbert Simon from his book, The Sciences of the Artificial, I think is a really great quote in terms of design. Basically says that everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. And I really like that because it talks about how I think about design. And most importantly, you have to actually understand where you are now before you can change it into a preferred situation. So to illustrate that is this great case study, not a job that I did but found out about this year. This elementary school in St. Louis, or St. Louis, sorry about my pronunciation. Is it St. Louis or St. Yes. So Gibson Elementary School, and they had a really huge problem with kids truanting. So lots and lots of kids weren't coming to school. And rather than punishing the kids, the principal decided to actually find out why. So she went to visit the parents, and what she found out really surprised her. The kids were embarrassed because their clothes were dirty. The parents didn't have access to washing machines. So it turned out that she shouldn't punish the kids for truanting. It was actually quite an easy solution. She went to Whirlpool, the white goods manufacturer, and got washing machines for free in the school. And almost immediately, 90% of those kids who had been truanting a lot started turning up to school, and their attitude in class also raised. And it's just such a fantastic example for me, I think, about what design is all about. She looked at the existing situation and she made it into a preferred one. She may not have realised at the time that she was using design, but she was using design. This model here, devised originally by the British Design Council, is a great way to visualise what we mean by design. It shows two diamond shapes end to end to describe the divergent and convergent processes that design is for us. And laid on top of that, I've added two little bits from Bill Buxton that talks about, so in the first diamond, the first phases of the design process, it's all about making sure that you're designing the right thing. So Principal Gunn at Gibson Elementary was designing for cleaning clothes, not for truancy. And then the second part of the diamond, when you start to explore multiple solutions, is about designing the thing right. So when Principal Gunn at Gibson Elementary was working out what to do about these kids, she started by asking why. She started asking, why are these kids truanting? And then she made sure she talked to the people in the system. She talked to the parents and the kids. And she also made sure that she was solving the right problem. She was solving for clean clothes, not for truancy. So in terms of service design, for me, service design is basically the application of this design principle of making things into preferred ones. And one of the things about service design, which is literally the design of services, either redesign of existing ones or new ones, is that it orchestrates both the behind the scenes and the front of house. And that's how it differs from, say, visitor experience, customer experience, experience design, because it really takes into consideration that backstage stuff. And we believe at Meld Studios that if you don't design the staff experience as well as you design the visitor experience, then you're not doing your job correctly. And we've seen too many organisations where the staff experience is so poor that you can't hope to deliver a great visitor experience. So it's really, really important. I'll go through two examples really, really quickly of service design projects that we've done at Meld Studios, just to give you a bit of a flavour of what we do. The first one might be a little bit different to what you're used to. This is a design for the justice system in New South Wales. And they came to us a couple of years ago because they had a bit of a problem. They had implemented some video technology, some quite expensive video technology, which linked prisons and courts so that prisoners could appear in court via video link rather than being transported to the court. And it wasn't actually being used. So the reasons that they had implemented this technology were quite rational. It was going to save a lot of money. Transporting prisoners across New South Wales is quite expensive. It's quite a big state. There's also contraband that can come back into the prison after the prisoner's been to court. And also it's really disruptive for prisoners to leave the prison because they can lose their bed. Before the hearing, they actually don't have a permanent bed. So there's lots of really good reasons why this video technology should have worked. But a year into it, it was only being used 40% of the time. So this justice system came to us so that we could help them understand why. So we went out, we got to visit prisons, which was eye-opening experience. We got to go into court and to lawyers' offices. We talked to people. We observed how they were using the video technology and we started to ask them what was going on. And what we found out was that the reason that the technology wasn't being used wasn't anything to do with the technology. It was that they actually haven't designed the systems around it well enough, and some of the policies of the various departments weren't working well enough to support the use of this technology. So we started to understand that we needed to design the right thing, and this was redesigning some of those policies. For example, when a prisoner appears in court, they get a lot of time with their lawyer both before and after the hearing to talk. But in a prison context, because the prison goes into lockdown at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there's not enough time for the prisoner and the lawyer to be able to actually have a dialogue. So they weren't getting as much access to legal resources as they should. So the lawyer was then asking that the prisoner be brought to court. So that's why the video technology wasn't being used. It had nothing to do with the technology, it had to do with legal access. So then we knew that what we were designing for, it was that amongst other things. It's a very complex system. And so what we did was then we took all of these challenges back out onto the road again, and we did collaborative workshops with prison officers, court officers, lawyers, police, and we had them design the solution. So we gave them all of the challenges that we'd identified and they came up with the ideas. We prioritised them with the executive, and following this, the government gave the justice system $41 million to actually go ahead and implement some of these ideas. And the thing about this project was, again, we started with asking why. Why isn't this technology being used? We solved the right problem with the right people in the room. We didn't continue to throw technology at the problem. We didn't just try and, upgrade the system. We actually looked a lot more deeply. And in terms of the right people in the room, because this is such a complex problem, it really needs to be solved collaboratively. We design with, not for people, because we can't possibly understand everything that's going on. So that was really important. And second case study I'll present is a little bit closer to the GLAM sector, and this is for the State Library of Victoria. And they came to us in 2015 and asked them to help reimagine the Library of the Future, which was a very exciting project and was going to be hugely transformational for the library, looking at all of their existing services and then understanding what the future of libraries could be. We started to understand how transformational this was going to be when, in our second meeting, the union sat us down and said, if you stuff this up in no uncertain terms, like, you're in trouble. So we really knew that we had to do this well. So we were very careful to design the actual project to be really super, super inclusive. One of the things that worked particularly well for this project was that we had 2 library staff with us the entire time. This is Ben and Bridie, and they were with us 100% of the time. They didn't have to go off and do their day job. They got to do the research with us. They got to do the interviews. They got to do the journey mapping. This shows them doing some of that. And that had 2 benefits. One, when we walked out the door, their design capability had been raised. They could use all of these tools that we're going to talk about today. And also the project had greater sustainability because they were intimately involved with all of the redesign. So they knew all of the projects really, really well. It was just fantastic. The other thing that we did was we prototyped. And we prototyped really early, really often, and for almost no cost. So this photograph here shows Ben briefing some of the library staff in the morning before one of the prototyping sessions. So before the library opened every morning, we would get the staff to dress up. They had little scripts and they had roles to play. Some of them played audience members, some of them played other staff, and they tested some of these ideas. This photograph shows another library member, a staff member, with a fake iPad that they were using as a greeting service. Now, one of the things about prototyping in this way, we also had town halls at lunchtime to go through the test and actually work out what worked well, and then we'd iterate in the afternoon and then test again the next morning. And doing this stuff early means that you can test out your ideas before you spend a whole lot of money, and potentially it doesn't work. This photograph shows Dominique from our studio sticking up a sign that basically says, pretend that this wall is not here. And this is a lot cheaper than knocking down the wall and then working out that this idea wasn't going to work in the first place. And we did a lot of this. We put black fabric over things and, said, please just pretend that this isn't here. And these prototype sessions worked really, really well. We got a lot of input from the staff. All in all, we included about 130 staff in the project, so there was a lot of buy-in once the ideas started being implemented, and they are. They got, I think, $81 million in funding from the state government to implement these ideas, and this journey map that's here, or this ecosystem map, shows all of the new services in situ in the library, and they're going through one by one and implementing all of these ideas. And it was a really, really successful project. We won a Service Design Award for the Good Design Awards with this. And best of all, the unions now hold this up as an example of how to do large-scale transformation projects. So we were pretty happy with that. With this project, we were designing the right problem. We had the right people in the room, and we prototyped early and often. And that's me. Over to you, Ariana.
So, at the American Museum of Natural History, we've been pretty enthusiastic about service design principles for some time, but mainly, around the concept, especially of journey mapping. We knew that it could bring about a certain number of insights into what our visitors experience, both before, during, and after the museum visit, but we never sort of formally explored what mapping a visitor journey might look like. So a few months ago, we contacted our Chief Digital Officer, Catherine Devine, actually contacted the wonderful Allegra Burnett, who's here today, along with her colleagues at Forrester Research, and invited them over to create a day-long workshop that basically walked us through a series of tasks and activities to help us create this journey map. So we started by creating personas. This is probably a concept familiar to many of you already. The particular personas that we created that you see here are a very busy tri-state area couple named Sarah and Rick. And Sarah and Rick are very busy, and they're very impatient, but they're very driven. They know that they really enjoy a unique experience at the museum, and that they enjoy and value a very educational activity, types of activities at the museum. So we use Sarah and Rick to sort of anchor a visitor journey, and we focused in particular on the tasks and activities around buying an admission ticket or a set of admission tickets to get into the museum. So we spent several hours unpacking all of these many touch points of the visitor journey, and what you see here is sort of a close-up of some of these touch points that we imagine Sarah and Rick might encounter. So when I say touch point, I mean any interaction, whether it's person to person or person to digital, that might occur between the visitor and our institution. And again, that's before, during, and after their museum visit. We wanted to understand what are all the things that Sarah and Rick might be doing before they arrive at our door. What were they looking for online? What sorts of subjects and tasks were they looking to perform? Were they successful? And if they were successful, how easy was it to find and do? And then when they showed up at the museum, who were the people that they talked to? And then unpacking all of the people, systems, and then the touch points that added up to create their visit. And just to back up quickly, I want to also point out that this entire workshop was sort of done as a pilot. We're a very big institution, and we wanted to first sort of dip our toe in the water before going in head first with all the stakeholders across the institution. And so just bear that in mind as sort of going through this. This was with a small group of people from a digital media team, about 8 of us, along with our senior vice president of communications, that were involved in sort of creating this idea of the journey map. So Sarah and Rick were our protagonists. And again, we spent hours building out this very elaborate journey map, which you can see in more detail here. And it's made up of all of these many touch points. Allegra and our colleagues invited us to kind of start thinking about, okay, these are the touch points that the visitor might see, but also think about the behind the scenes touch points. You know, what are all the systems and the people that support the processes and activities that create the visitor experience ultimately? So we had to really sort of unpack, oh my gosh, you know, walking up to a point of sale terminal and talking to a customer service representative involves half a dozen different, people and systems. It's not just Sarah and Rick talking to one person. It's Sarah and Rick talking to one person who then talks to a computer terminal, which then talks to custom software, and you get the idea. So this was super, super useful in and of itself, building out this visitor journey map. We learned a whole lot about the visitor journey across the museum, again, as just, the digital media team. But the key activity here is that they also invited us to think about the emotional state of mind at each and every one of these touch points. When Sarah and Rick arrive at our door, their bags are going to get checked. And we had to think about, okay, well, what's their state of mind when they're standing in front of our security guard? Are they having a great time? Are they feeling maybe a little intimidated? And how does that emotional state of mind color that touch point and ultimately their memories of their trip to the museum? So more than anything, it was that sort of piece of the visitor journey mapping exercise that really sort of made this a human exercise as well. I liked that we focused mainly on we did focus on the customer experience, obviously, but we also had to unpack the behind-the-scenes activities that add up to the visitor experience. But it was that emotional sort of state of mind and thinking about how that adds on to the visitor experience that really made this a fantastic exercise. So after we had sort of unpacked all of these touch points and activities and processes and people involved, we also walked through a set of prioritization exercises. And so what you see here is mapping the value to the visitor across the effort to implement. So after we had sort of taken a look at the visitor journey, then we were asked, well, look at the opportunities that this presents to you and think about how would you place this along these two very relevant axes to determine what are easy wins, what are maybe longer term wins, and think about it in those terms as well. So what we discovered, and this is maybe one of the good things and the bad things about service design, is, like I said, we were the digital media team, so obviously all of our attention was really focused on the digital opportunities. But if you look in the yellow sort of sweet spot corner here, none of these easy wins that deliver high value to the visitor are digital opportunities. These are actually, types of things that our visitor services department might want to take on or consider, or a marketing team. So that's another sort of outcome that maybe surprised us a little bit and will also be really important for us to think about, as we carry out some of the design thinking ideas we have with the institution. So it was a lot to unpack. There was a lot to internalize. And it was, quite frankly, a little bit overwhelming. We were exhausted at the end of the day, but it was a happy tired. And we realized that, wow, we really have a lot to communicate and a lot of navel gazing that we should probably continue doing. But it was also really encouraging because it gave us some really great ideas and some good homework. So these are some of the key learnings, and one of the things is we did make this, again, a pilot day-long workshop, but it takes a lot of time to really understand, at least in an institution as big as ours, to really understand that visitor journey, but it's really worth it. And you can always backlog, what you don't want to tackle in the near term. And I'd also add to this list that there are a ton of service design tools out there. There's no one right set of tools and sequences of using these tools that's really going to add up to that, magic set of revelations for your organization. But we found that this workshop was a good introduction to some of these tools so that we can now sort of go away and think about, given our culture and given the culture of our leadership, who it's so critical that they have, early buy-in to this process. What are the sort of the tools and the conversations that we can introduce to make this really a worthwhile effort? And we had to sort of keep reminding ourselves along the way that it's really okay to start with baby steps and to work from easy to hard, because as you sort of get into the weeds with all of these touch points, it can be a little overwhelming. And another key learning we had was just the simple reminder of having empathy for our visitors. And I feel like, along with that emotional component of the visitor journey touch points, empathy is so important to crafting that really good visitor experience, and but also, building trust and momentum internally within the museum. You really can't have one without the other. I think, as Kimberley mentioned earlier, without having, the staff buy-in, you really can't do much effectively or sustainably with design thinking. So adding empathy into the equation and to the discussion is also a way to sort of take the conversation up a level. So once you introduce empathy into the conversation, it's no longer digital talking to membership. It's no longer digital talking to visitor services. It's about collectively sort of rallying around the idea of how can we collaboratively create empathy for our visitors and ultimately deliver a better visitor experience. So back to baby steps. As a tiny step in this direction, we are bringing visitor feedback more formally into the release process for all of our digital products across the ecosystem that we have. So our team is primarily in charge of website development and app development and a few kiosks. So we are reminding ourselves as a result of this exercise that, hey, it's really important that we don't sort of, put our blinders on and get into our, product management mode and churn out digital products. We really have to actively and sustainably and consistently get out there and ask our visitors, what do you think of this, that, and the other? And that can take the form of, on-site visitor surveys or online user testing or online surveys. So as we start to get into the habit of this, we're just now sort of kicking this off or trying to make this an internalized habit. We hope that we can sort of continue to apply design thinking in bigger and bigger ways and spread this type of methodology and these concepts to wider and wider areas of the museum, not only to improve our visitors' experience, but to also bring about that shift in thinking among all of our departments that really adds up to a better visitor experience at our museum. So that is me, and I will pass over to Dana.
Just sit there. So this is not a very human-centered room. I want to give the people in the back the option if you want to move up closer, because I see some of you trying to take pictures of the slides, and I know they're really hard to see. So if you want to get up and move up closer, I invite you to. It's really hard for us to see you and you to see us. So does anybody want to come up closer? We're friendly. We'd love to have you up here. Anybody, Ray, way in the back there, want to come up? I'm going to call you guys. If I know your name, I'm going to call you out. Come on up. Rob, thank you. Because I know it's hard to see from back there. You can sit with us. Yes. Yay. Emily's very friendly. We got seats in the right. If studies show that if you sit in the front, you actually learn more. For real. For the test. Yeah, for the test that Dan's going to administer afterward. So how do I click?
Oh, just tap on that guy there. Oh, sorry. There you go.
So good morning, everybody. I'm Dana Mitroff Silvers, and I run a small consultancy in the San Francisco Bay Area called Designing Insights. And we work with museums as well as other types of organizations on coaching them in design thinking methodologies. We facilitate workshops. We do user research engagements, and I also run a website called Design Thinking for Museums. But before doing this, I was at SF MoMA for 11 years running the website. So I've been both inside in the trenches, feeling the pain of being inside an organization, and now I work outside of a museum, working with many different types of organizations around the country on introducing design thinking, service design, human-centered design tools and methods. So what I'm going to talk about in my brief time here is some of the tools and the mindsets that you can use to bring service design and human-centered design into your organization. Can you guys hear me? Is the mic picking me up? I do have a pretty loud voice, so hopefully you'll be able to hear me. So I'm going to start with a story about the importance of asking why. This is not from museums, it's from the airline industry. An airline was interested in speeding up their check-in process at their kiosks, so they hired IBM to come in and look at what was going on with these kiosks. And the engineers went straight to look at the software and figure out how can we speed this up, make this app run faster. But the designers went and talked to the flight agents to find out what was going on with these kiosks. What they discovered was that the agents really struggled to keep these things charged because they would come unplugged, because their uniforms were so constricting and their shoes were so uncomfortable they couldn't reach behind and plug them in and keep them charged. So what they did was they replaced the kiosks with apps that they could hold and that passengers could now be checked in. They got rid of the kiosks. They increased the check-in time, and they did this by asking why. Now, when I heard this story, I thought, why didn't they redesign these damn uniforms and give these women more comfortable clothes? But I'm sure there's another story behind that. But what they did was they asked why. Why weren't these kiosks being used effectively? It had nothing to do with the technology. So this is one of the principles we've talked about, this importance of asking why. They talked to people in the system, and they asked why. So one of the methods you can use to get to the why is called the 5 whys. Has anybody read the book The Lean Startup by Eric Ries? Just Laura? Allegra? So I recommend this book. It's about the lean startup software methodology. And in this book, the author Eric Ries talks about this method called the 5 whys. And it was pioneered by a guy at Toyota and the Toyota factories in the 1950s named Taiichi Ono. And it's also called root cause analysis. This is about getting to the root cause of a problem by asking why. And I'm going to give you an example of this from museums. But first, I want to share a quote with you from Eric Ries. He posits that behind every supposedly technical problem is actually a human problem. So this is an example of the 5 whys in a museum. You know what? I can't actually see in there. I'm going to have to look at the screen. I'm going to take this off. So in this example, the first question is, why did the lanyards on the audio guides get so dirty? Because family visitors wear them throughout their entire visit, including lunch. Okay, we could stop there and say, well, we need to redesign the lanyards and get some special dirt-resistant, antibacterial material. But we can keep asking why. Well, why do family visitors wear the devices throughout their entire visit? They check it out, they hang it around their neck, and they forget about it. Okay. So why do they forget about it? They never even turn it on and listen to it. Well, why don't they turn it on and listen to it? Because they think it'll interfere with their family social experience. So why do they think it'll interfere with their family social experience? Because they assume it will take too much solitary time to listen to. So this example shows you that if you go down this ladder of whys, you can start getting to other opportunities for solutions. So you could just stop at the first why, but as we go down, we can look at the whole system. You might train the staff who check out the devices to remind people, don't forget about your audio tours. Or did you know that you can take it together as a family? Or did you know it'll only take X amount of time? You could put signage throughout the museum. You could have people there to remind people. You could have special targeted family tours. So by going down this ladder of whys, there are many more opportunities that we can design for. So this is a method that you can use in your institution. Another principle we talked about is talking with people often. And this picture is from the National Gallery of Art. I worked with them this summer, and these are staff members interviewing visitors in the galleries. Is there anyone here from the National Gallery? No. So why do we want to talk with people often is to build empathy with them, which has been a theme of this conference, or even a meme, you might say. And it's very important to talk to our visitors because we can connect with them. And if we connect with them and we have empathy for them, we can design better for them. Because if we truly care about the people for whom we are making products, services, experiences, exhibitions, whatever it is you create, you're going to do it better if you connect with the people for whom you're making it. Some tools for empathy that I'm going to share with you are ethnographic interviews, immersions and observations, and empathy maps. So one of the tools, ethnographic interviews, this comes from the field of anthropology, and these are open-ended conversations with people that are about getting stories and emotions. These are qualitative interviews. When I work with museums, I send staff members out into the galleries with what I call a conversation guide, not a script, and they go out and have conversations with visitors. And these interviews can take the form both with visitors, but also internally with staff and stakeholders. So this photo here on the left, this is at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. This is a curator and a security guard interviewing each other, building empathy for each other. These folks never talk to each other. They don't understand the challenges that each other faces. So they interviewed each other. We had staff interview each other. This photo here on the right is also the National Gallery, and this was staff interviewing visitors. So, and Rob talked about this in his presentation yesterday about using empathy with internal stakeholders. So it's a powerful tool, not just with visitors, with the public, but internally with staff. Best practices around doing these interviews is asking why, which we've talked about a lot. And I like to say it's like being an annoying 2-year-old. You just keep asking why. Why? Use open-ended questions. These are not yes-no questions. This is not about a survey where we're trying to get specific information. We're eliciting stories and emotions. We're having conversations. You want to focus on listening. It's really about what the person is telling you. And we want to take notes and photos so that you capture all that great information. Another method we can use to build empathy are immersions and observations. And this really gets at what Ariana and Kimberley were talking about, understanding the whole system and all the services that go into play when you're looking at something, what's happening, not only what happens at front of house, but behind the house. Back of house. This is at the Getty Museum. The team was redesigning the Getty Guide handheld multimedia tour, and the first step that we did, my colleague and I, we put ourselves through the entire experience. So we waited in line, we checked out the device, we handed over a driver's license, we talked to the people who checked out the Getty Guides, we observed people using them, we interviewed people using them, so we went through the entire experience ourselves and immersed ourselves in it. Then a tool that we use after going out and doing these immersions and observations is called an empathy map. And I don't know if you guys can see it in the back, so I'm going to read to you what's in it. It's 4 quadrants. This is a tool we use to unpack what we've heard and seen from talking to people, talking to humans, whether those are visitors or stakeholders or whoever they are. There are 4 quadrants: say, do, think, and feel. And in say, we're capturing quotes, defining words. What did we hear from people? Do is, what are their actions? What are their behaviors? What did we see people do? What did we observe them do? And then these things over on the right, these are inferred, these are implicit. What are the thoughts, feelings, and emotions of the people that we've talked to? So some of this stuff is observed and explicit, but some of this is implicit and observed. These are examples of completed empathy maps from the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. So we did many, many interviews with visitors over a series of many workshops and then came back and created empathy maps. Another method that we talked about is test your ideas early and often. And this slide, it's probably hard to see from the back, I'm just going to tell you the essence of it is you want to prototype and fail early in the process. Because if you're prototyping right before your launch, it's too late. It's going to cost you a lot of money. You're probably going to find out things aren't working and you're not going to be able to do much. So you want to be prototyping and failing early. I like to tell people that you can prototype before you even really know what you're doing. So prototyping is a way to work out your ideas and think through it. It's not just a way to validate what you're doing is right, but it's a way to actually, I call it think to build. You build something and you try it, and by creating it and testing it, you figure out what you want to do. And that, in the end, will reduce risk and reduce costs because you're going to learn when it's early. And anything can be prototyped. I'm going to show you examples of prototypes that were all created in under an hour at various types of museums with very low-cost materials. This is a prototype of a program. This is at the Oakland Museum of California. This was an education program, and it was a listening booth where educators could talk to each other and have a facilitated conversation. So the team prototyped it at their Friday night museum event. Once a month, they have the museum is open with food trucks and music. So this was a program that we were prototyping, not a thing, not a digital thing. This is a service. This is at the LA County Museum of Art, and it was a service to greet people before they got in the ticket line, to cut down on the bottleneck at the ticket line and help people orient themselves before they went through the ticketing experience. And we prototyped it by someone standing in a sandwich board, and we had a plate of cookies. That's how we got people to come over to us. This is Wayfinding at the Air and Space Museum. This is before the museum has recently been redesigned, the Milestones of Flight exhibition space. So we were prototyping Wayfinding. Mobile tours can be prototyped. This is Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and the screens were prototyped with Post-its and Sharpies. And whenever somebody would press a button where they're clicking, we would flip the Post-it and show them what the next screen would be. And then we were testing out audio, playing it off of someone else's iPhone. We took it in the galleries. In-gallery kiosks can be prototyped. This is also Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and this kiosk is a cardboard box. And we put it in the dinosaur gallery and tested it out with people. Internal programs can be prototyped. This is from a tech company. This is not from a museum. It's from Atlassian Software. And this was called the Sensational Flop Open Mic. And what it was staff members would share projects that had failed. and learn from each other. And what they ended up doing was incorporating this into their staff meetings where people would share a story about, hey, I did this project, I totally screwed up, this is what happened, and this is what I learned. So we prototyped it, and people shared stories of like the horrible email that accidentally got all staff CC'd on it. I mean, stories like that, where people like, yep, I learned from that one. New processes can be prototyped. This was also at the same tech company. This was called the side project clock, where people could take on a side project modeled on the Google 20% time, where people would take an extra project to work on something they wanted to explore. And sometimes people couldn't figure out, what am I going to work on? I don't know what to do. Even driverless cars can be prototyped. This is Balboa Park in San Diego, and these are chairs and cardboard boxes. Yeah, you were there. A few years ago. So you can prototype things like driverless cars. And I want to remind you, one of the points Ariana talked about is baby steps are better than no steps. So you can try all of these things in very, very low barrier to entry ways. So for example, you can do 5 15-minute intercept interviews. And even in 5 interviews, you'll start to see patterns. There are studies showing that 80% of patterns and insights are going to emerge after 5 interviews. You can run observations just every few months in the galleries. You can take 20 minutes out of a meeting to create a prototype. You can bring a prototype to a meeting instead of bringing a PowerPoint or a Word document. And you can test the prototype with just 5 users and start to see patterns. And lastly, I want to convey that mindsets matter as much as methods. So how you do it is just as important as what you do. And some of the mindsets that I think are key to human-centered design, one of them is yes and. This comes from improv theater, and it's about supporting each other and saying yes, embracing this notion of experimenting and trying, and embracing your colleagues' ideas and saying, yeah, we're going to try it, we're going to prototype it, it may work, it may not, but yes, we're going to try it. Another one is bias towards action. This is about getting out there and doing it, getting away from your desk, away from the conference room, and out there and trying things. And not just talk about it and analyze, but do it. And then embrace constraints. Everybody faces constraints in museums. We have constraints of budget, time. We don't have enough resources. But these constraints can actually make you more creative. By having limited time and limited materials, you can actually be more creative. I find that in all the work I do, constraints make people more creative. So embrace those constraints. So just recapping these lessons and best practices that we've shared with you, are you want to start with why. Be that annoying 2-year-old asking why. Solve the right problem, like the truancy problem. It was about not having clean clothes. Or the kiosk, it was about not being able to reach the plugs. Talk to people often. Get away from your desk and talk to people. Test your ideas early and often. Baby steps are better than no steps. Just try something. Have the right people in the room, which is what Ariana talked about, and then mindsets matter. So how you do it is as important as what you do. Wow, right on time. Wow, awesome. So now we have 15 minutes for questions and discussion. So we're going to open it up to questions and discussion. And maybe when you ask a question, tell us where you're from and what your role is. There's always a moment when nobody wants to ask a question. So I could just call on people too. Yeah, so tell us where you're from.
Yeah, my name is Angela Manuel from the National Museum.
Okay.
These are really great processes and steps towards getting sort of design. I'm just wondering, what is your experience or your advice in terms of driving this kind of design, and coming from leadership, having buy-in, collaboration, the players involved in really something.
So that question was about buy-in and getting something like this going in an organization, especially with regards to leadership. I want to recap for people who couldn't hear that. I hear this question every single time I work with museums, like every single time. Everyone has this question. And I think one of the methods is to start small and demonstrate success. Start with a low-stakes project that you can try it with and build a momentum. Get a buddy that you can do this with. You can't do this alone in your institution. It's too hard. You have to have a buddy and pick a really small project and try it out and start to demonstrate how it's working. And then you can make your work visible. So for example, I started doing this at SF MoMA, and I would interview visitors and I'd put their pictures around my cubicle. And people would walk by and say, "What's that? Oh, who's that?" I'd put the empathy maps up on the wall. So people say, "Oh, what is this? Oh, that's really interesting." So you start to build momentum and build interest, but you've got to start small. You can't start with the highest stakes, biggest project, because it's just not going to work. Do you guys want to add to this?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I'd add to that, as Dana mentioned, having the right people in the room, and even if you think that, nobody is going to really get, pick up what I'm putting down here, for design thinking, chances are there's probably someone in your organization who's maybe a little bit more open-minded or progressive, and you can partner with that person to sort of be your champion or, champion on your behalf for some of these concepts. And the other thing too is, as I mentioned, there's no one right set of tools. So, pick the conversations and the tools that will resonate, with your culture. So if someone is particularly fond of, I don't know, prioritization exercises or pie charts or whatever, go in that direction. You meet your leadership where they are with a lot of these ideas.
There was another question just in front. Was that you? Yeah. No.
Yeah, I tell you, everybody has that question. Another question. Well, I would ask, so you're from the Field Museum, your question is about going out with prototypes and then getting pushback around, it has to be standardized, it has to be... Yeah, we have to schedule it, write up a protocol. Well, my question to you is what happens if you don't do that? Because yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've worked with many institutions that are very nervous at this idea of taking things out that don't look perfect and beautiful. I was working with a museum this summer where there was a moment where the boss had a freak out like, "Oh my God, we can't take these out. This is not how we work." And we all slowed down. We came back to it the next morning and we refined it a little bit and we took it out. And she said, "Wow, I realized nobody died, nobody got fired. This was okay. This was fantastic." It's just saying okay, let's start small. When we went into a gallery that wasn't busy and we just tried it out for 15 minutes. I think one of the things I do is just say, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. Allegra, please.
I think another approach would actually be to invite those people to do
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
And because I think once they actually... It's funny because this comes from the people who do evaluation. Oh, really?
Another thing that you can do is actually, if it's not so site-specific, is you could take it somewhere else.
Yes, that's wonderful.
So, it's a great point that Allegra just made, is bring the people with you who are hesitant, but also just go somewhere else that they're not going to worry about it so much.
Annalise.
So Dave, you talked about prototyping a whole wide range of things. Some of those I wasn't aware of. Do you, have any of your panels have experienced prototyping social media strategies?
Let's recap her question.
Yeah, so the question was about prototyping social media strategies. I don't have any particular experience in that, I'm sorry.
I can't say I do either, but I am curious, is there something in particular you imagined or had? Okay.
Do tell.
Maybe less specific. So we were working with Allegra, honestly,
Yeah.
you even know what you're doing, which
Yeah.
is for sure the things are right. So I was just wondering if anyone had anything.
My initial thought, this is about prototyping social media with different audiences, and you don't know exactly what you're doing. Maybe I would think of ways you can prototype that not using social media, kind of like what Kimberly said. Like, I like to think of analogous ways to prototype things. So I'll give you an example. There was a group prototyping a new telephone call, like putting people on hold system. So the way they started prototyping is they went to the post office where people are standing in line physically, because it's an analogous situation where you're physically standing in a line, and they're prototyping something where you're on hold on a phone. So think about what it is you're trying to learn around the social media and ways you might prototype in different ways with people in person. So there are ways to prototype things that are analogous. There was another example of a group prototyping a new way to deal with the triage in a hospital. So they went out and observed race cars coming in at the race car track, what happens when drivers come in, because it's like a critical situation and it's analogous. So I'd be happy to brainstorm with you ways you could prototype that maybe don't involve putting it on the Getty social media account.
Hi, my name is Jamie Lawyer. I work at the British Museum in New York City in interpretation and engagement. I love this conversation of prototyping just in general. I think so often we work in institutions where presenting brainstorms are often seen as the final product. And even having a prototype automatically kills an idea because it's not fully formed. So how do you move from your culture to have every idea, it needs to be finalized without prototyping needed? You have to move forward with it to get people to step back so you don't feel like you're flip-flopping in dialogue, so they can trust in you and feel like they can co-collaborate and create with you.
The starting small thing, I really like Dana's idea of taking 20 minutes out of a normal meeting to do some workshopping or something like that, and maybe you could actually be brave and take it into a normal meeting. We got feedback from a museum a couple of days ago because we did a workshop in a presentation rather than just standing up and doing PowerPoint slides. And people in the museum said, wow, that was the most fun I've ever had in a meeting. So you could actually just say, you know what, we're going to do something different today, and just prototype actually in the meeting.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, I don't know if this is another case where it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. So maybe showing up armed to one of these discussions with some actual, data in hand might help kickstart some thinking. Just a thought.
I just say there's some great resources in their room, like Emily, I don't want to call her out, but she's done this. You prototyped in a meeting, right? You ran a meeting where you guys prototyped the meeting in the meeting or something very meta. How did it work for you?
So I did a workshop with Dana at the Getty in 2013, and I will say the Getty is a phenomenal organization for bringing in design thinking strategies sort of from the ground up as like a transformational working style, and they're getting people all over this conference, so find them. I bought 1,000 Post-its and Sharpies, and I got my MW bag, and I filled it up with art supplies, and I lugged it to every meeting I went to. And I forced people to write on the Post-its, and they loved it. I mean, it's, at the end of the day, I think it's about committing to it yourself, and allowing, giving other people sort of a comfortable, and actually I think if you just do it in a meeting, it's much less commitment than doing it in like a formalized, like, we're going to do design thinking now. Like, no, let's just, let's try group brainstorming. Let's try, everybody get something down on Post-its, and then we'll refine and sort, and what happens then, and just trying to get some of these like alternate working styles in the meetings.
Video is also really powerful. So if you could actually video you doing a prototype with somebody and just take, it's a 3-minute video and I'm just going to show you this example. So, yeah.
And I was just going to add to that also, it doesn't have to be the meeting with all the top people. There's lots of smaller interactions with colleagues at different levels. So you don't have to emphasize like a formal meeting. You can find ways to practice it in smaller opportunities too.
Great. Any more?
I would just say we also hid it in a totally theoretical exercise that wasn't about our own museum.
Oh,
And so that helps. It really like got rid of everybody's baggage because they weren't bringing in their own stuff.
Yeah.
And then actually could apply it to the real life situation that of course is what we were trying to get at anyway. And just didn't admit it until we started the conversation about a fake other museum.
what was the fake thing you hid it in?
We were talking about this fake museum we created called the Lost and Found Museum. We first off didn't even tell people what that was, and so the first step was, what is the Lost and Found Museum? And we got like 4 completely different answers based on the groups that broke out, and then what is one program at this museum that you would like to create in the first year of its existence? And that got us to actually thinking about, are the programs that we're doing at our own museum the programs that we really want to be doing?
Oh, nice.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Or anyone else have tips or things you've tried that have worked or didn't work?
I broke apart the concepts of design thinking into their component elements, and that was very helpful instead of trying to, sorry. I broke apart the concepts of design thinking into their component pieces and tried to bring those individual things into every meeting instead of trying to bring in the whole process that feels like it somewhat has to be set aside. Trying to bring in different elements. Let's just go talk to visitors. Maybe we don't have to do formal interviews. Or let's just go try a prototype. Maybe we don't have to do the whole lead-up process.
Chris.
I wanted to share something that I've been trying with prototyping interpretive labels. That is
super simple and worked amazingly well. So we take our interpretive labels out into the galleries, and it's just a sheet of paper with the interpretive text on it, and we ask our visitors to read them to us out loud.
Oh, wow.
And Beverly Sorrell actually told me about this, and so we start trying it, and it's amazing. Because you can tell instantly where the problems are. You can tell whether it's effective because people will hand you the piece of paper back and say things like, okay, where is this? Because now I want to see it. Or, stuff like that. And so we, once again, like 5 visitors, 10 visitors. It's, we can do it in 20 minutes if we have a team. And it's super effective.
Wow. Oh, that's awesome.
Hi, my name is Eric Rivers. I work for a consulting engineering firm called Arup. This is my first MCN. It's lots of fun. So I work in places where there's high volume, high traffic, and I work through efficiencies and flow. And I want to say in some of the service design work we've done, I think it was really useful to establish a series of goals for the project or some sort of aims. So when you get to that point where you're finding that somebody says, it's just too hard, I don't want to do it, you can always go back to that goal and say, well, this is what we're trying to achieve. It ends up elevating those, you get out of the rut of just saying it's too hard. That'd be my point.
This is a room full of wisdom. Yeah. This is great. It really is.
We're probably about time,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you, guys.